Welcome to another episode of the Archer Love and Friends podcast. This is your host, Prescott. And today, we're going to be diving deep into the waters of yoga, which is very appropriate coming up on Easter. I love Jesus Christ, and there are many Christians that have a misconception of yoga and what yoga is, and think that yoga is an act of satanic worship. They believe that the postures of yoga are used to embody different deities and gods. And here I am with an expert yogi, a yoga instructor. He's going to explain what yoga really is about, where that belief came from, and I'm going to give it to you now.
Thank you.
So, what is yoga?
So, yoga in a classical sense is actually a science of the mind. The majority of people now see yoga as a primarily physical practice to open your body, decompress, breathe, and get some mindful movement in, which is an aspect of it. However, the word yoga is a Sanskrit word that translates to yoking or union. It has two meanings, and the so-called union is referring to uniting your individual consciousness with God consciousness, or what some call Brahman, which is another word for God. And so that is the foundation.
Which is interesting, because the Brahmin cows, there's a very special breed of cow called the Brahmin cow, and those cows come from India, right? And they revere those cows very highly. They worship them.
They do worship
Yeah.
them. Mm-hmm.
And I don't want to go off track, but I just wanted to leave that little note there for people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, very true. Great point. And so under that umbrella of the union that yoga is referring to is a yoga wheel. And so this wheel of yoga has 6 spokes on it, and all of those spokes represent different ways to practice yoga. So if you want, I could go through those.
Yeah, let's hear about the spokes.
Okay, so the spokes on the yoga wheel, we can start with the most common, the most recognized form of yoga, which is the asana practice. The asana practice is the physical practice of yoga that is essentially sharpening your body, preparing your body for the health and the drive and commitment that it takes to really walk upon the path of yoga.
And I like that, because I've always seen the body as a temple, and as a temple, it houses spirits. And the spirits that will be housed in the temple, which become the mind or the personality, or the ego, they have a vibration. And by tuning the body, like a tuning fork, and strengthening the body, allows us to hold and anchor in higher vibrational spirits, thoughts. Like a spirit is a thought form.
Mm-hmm.
And so as we strengthen the body and tune the body through practices like yoga, we're able to have higher vibration thoughts and hold higher vibration spirits in the temple, basically, which is one of the reasons I love yoga.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, me too. I agree. It's like a hiker, right? Climbing to the steepest peak of a mountain. They need that warrior-like physique to carry them beyond what it takes mentally.
Right. And if the body, I believe that God has given us the body. And I believe that God has given us the body to use as a tool to serve the divine or God's purpose. So by strengthening the body, we allow it to become a better tool for God's work, or also known as hiking the mountain. But I also like to say, don't reach the mountaintop, let the mountaintop reach you.
Yeah. I love that. So moving from the asana yoga, we have what they call jhana yoga. And jhana yoga is another path of liberation for especially the intellectual. Jhana yoga means knowledge and wisdom. So this practice of yoga is essentially the commitment to always learn new things, always educate yourself, gain wisdom, listen to wise, experienced people, and take your time in developing a wide range of knowledge throughout your life. And that is a practice of yoga.
Interesting. So that's a practice off the mat.
Well, actually, every other spoke of the wheel outside of the asana practice is off the mat. You can take all of them on and off the mat. However, asana is the classic known, I'm practicing yoga on my mat.
Oh, so all the other 5 wheels are basically off the mat, like lifestyle yoga.
Yeah, so that's what I think is a really common misconception, is that yoga is just limited or reduced to this physical form, when the whole wheel actually takes up so much more outside of the mat than it does on the mat.
And what is this limb called?
So that wheel, that spoke is called jhana.
So jhana. So examples of jhana would be like reading a book, seeking a mentor, studying,
studying at a higher education level, becoming an intern or an apprentice, and just really staying in that space of deepening your intellectual mind,
Yeah.
And,
Beautiful.
And then, so from jhana, we have karma yoga, which karma means selfless acts of service. So this form of yoga is related to unconditional giving, helping those in need, and serving others with no thought or expectation of receiving something back.
I love that. Reminds me of something I've seen from you personally. Like, we were walking into Tractor Supply once, and you saw some trash in the parking lot. You picked it up and found a garbage can and threw it away. That's a yogic practice off the mat, right?
That's karma yoga.
Karma yoga. There you go. Makes sense.
Yeah, karma yogas, they're really, really special.
Yeah.
And then moving from that, we have bhakti yoga, which bhakti means devotion. So this practice of yoga is for those who are, dedicating their lives to the respect, the reverence of a higher power, and devoting themselves to that higher power, within their thought forms, within what they consume, within their prayer, meditation, mantra, whatever it may be, and taking that space to really honor and devote yourself to the divine.
That's great. So that can be meditation, plant medicine work, prayer, all of that type of stuff.
It could be all that if your intention, is devotion.
Yeah,
And,
your
bhakti
intention
yoga.
is to be a better service to the divine, right? For the divine to show you things that you're missing, that you need to see, to be in better service to the divine, all that sort of stuff, that intention.
that intention.
Which, like, you can just wake up every day and start your day with that intention.
Like bhakti.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And then moving from that, so we covered asana, jhana, karma, bhakti. There's 2 left. So the next one is Raja Yoga. Raja is known as the royal path of yoga. So this is the focusing on the mind's control and meditation to achieve self-realization. So the main idea behind Raja Yoga is detaching from worldly illusions. So it's really this practice.
Detaching from what?
Worldly illusion, like the Maya.
Right, the Maya, the Matrix, Babylon. Yes,
Yeah.
the material realm, basically.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Which, like we were just discussing, like the Luciferic religion is one that basically serves the material realm and worships the material realm.
Yeah.
Whereas this spoke of the yogic philosophy is detaching from the material realm. And I actually love that. I personally see the material realm as a mirage. Like, if you're in the desert and you're just dying of thirst, you might see a well and run over to it and try to drink of it and realize it's just sand pouring into your mouth.
Right.
It's the mirage. When humans seek the material realm first, they seek money, cars, Andrew Tate stuff, whatever it is, they get it and they realize it's completely empty.
Right.
And so then they seek more and more and more, and it's all empty at the end of the day.
Right.
It's the mirage. So that this branch of yoga, which is called what?
Raja.
Mirage. Raja. Right.
Yeah, exactly.
Makes sense.
It's detachment.
So this Raja spoke is detaching from the mirage of the physical realm.
Right. And yeah, really the primary form of practicing Raja Yoga is meditation. Because that's what is the discipline required to control your mind.
Yes, I love that. And one of the things that I find most beneficial about meditation is simply the act of not acting. Like, you're sitting there for 30 minutes, whatever. You want to move your head 2 inches to the left, right? Nope, not going to do it. I'm going to completely detach from everything that the material realm wants me to do.
Right.
Everything my body wants me to do. Everything my mind wants me to do. All of that. Just let it go.
Yeah, exactly. And I believe the last one is mantra yoga. So mantra yoga is cultivating, chanting the sacred ancient sounds to essentially just honor and embody the vocal and phonetic aspect of yoga.
So how is this different than kirtan, if at all?
Mantra yoga?
Yeah, sounds like kirtan.
It's kirtan is the genre of music that branched off of mantra yoga.
It did?
Oh,
so mantra yoga is kind of like kirtan. Like, practicing kirtan is sort of dialing in the mantra form of yoga.
Yes.
And I love kirtan because everything is energy.
Right.
And frequency, vibration.
Exactly.
And kirtan is about anchoring in these high vibrations through sound. Yeah. And many of these mantras, they have meanings, that they're like prayers, basically. But the great thing is, like, they're all good prayers that have nothing to do with the physical realm. Like, for example, there's no prayer for being rich. There's a prayer for being abundant. And abundant isn't having more, it's needing less.
Right.
Exactly. And so for those who might think, oh, okay, this is where these mantras, this is where they're channeling demons or whatever.
Right.
It's like, actually, these mantras are about love, peace, oneness, forgiveness, understanding, abundance, the Christ consciousness, basically
Right.
all of the virtues are hidden within prayers and these mantras.
Right, exactly. It's a prayer. That's what they really are. And, on a physical aspect, they're very beneficial because they stimulate your nerves, through vibration. So you're also getting this really profound sound healing on a physical level while, praying. And that's what is distinct about mantra yoga beyond a common prayer.
Yes, awesome. So, yeah, because there's so many different types of prayer,
Yeah.
So we have bhakti, karma, mantra, ajna, Raja, right? Mirage, Raja.
Yes.
And what was the first one?
Asana.
Asana. Okay, so that's 5. And you said
And
there's...
then jhana.
And then jhana.
We did all 6.
Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome. And you also talked about 8 limbs.
Yes.
So how does that tie in?
So the 8 limbs are underneath Raja Yoga because Raja Yoga is considered the royal path of yoga. So, because Raja, that's essentially the translation is royal path. And so the 8 limbs fall under Raja Yoga, which the 8 limbs are essentially essentially the steps needed to take to walk that royal path. And they go in order. And you can kind of look at it like this tree, starting with this lowest branch, working all the way up to the highest branch where there's fruit on it, right? The fruiting branches. So. And
with this, is this the tree from the Garden of Eden that Eve ate of, the apple tree? I don't know.
Well,
probably not, but who knows?
With this tree, if you reach the fruit, then you're golden.
You're having a conversation with God.
You're in samadhi, which is enlightenment.
Right. Enlightenment.
Yeah.
Which is what the snake basically told Eve she would get. I do think she got a short end of the deal. I think she was lied to. I think there was maybe the correct tree was like around the corner a little bit, and she was probably making her way towards that one.
Probably.
When the snake intercepted her. She was probably using her divine feminine intuition, seeking out a tree, and the snake was like, "Oh, but look at this tree.
Right.
Those are the apples you're looking for."
Right.
And fooled her.
It's a good lesson not to hop the lower branches.
It's also a good lesson not to go against the will of God.
Yeah. And follow the steps, right?
Right. So let's talk about those 8 limbs.
Okay. The 8 limbs are great. It's essentially, so the 8 limbs, we can start with the first limb, which is the yamas. Those are known as restraints. So the yamas, there's 5 of them. We don't have to go into all of them because each limb has its own set of practices, if that makes sense. So like, for example,
Right.
The first limb is yamas, but there's 5 yamas. So that can be another time. But just starting with the first limb, yama is talking about these ethical principles, this ethical blueprint that, governs interactions with others, with yourself, and sets a framework of your ethics and your morals.
Like the golden rule, do unto others as you'd have unto you, all these ethics.
Right.
Right. Yeah, that's the first limb.
That's the first limb.
Right.
And also, treating yourself. That's, it's talking about union. So the way that you would treat earth, others, animals, yourself, your relationship to the divine.
You are in a union with yourself. Whether you know it or not, you're in a union with yourself. So every time you hurt another, you're hurting yourself.
Right, and every time you hurt yourself, you're hurting another.
Right.
Because you're not
Because hurt people hurt people. So if you hurt yourself, you're going to end up hurting someone else too.
Yeah.
Yeah, and people start with their thoughts.
Yeah.
They normally start hurting themselves with their thoughts,
Mm-hmm.
and then they might start hurting themselves with their actions,
Right.
and then they might start hurting other people
Right.
with their words.
And so luckily, we can go into the yamas another time, but the very first yama is about we can just, for an example of that, the very first yama, the very first thing that, the very first branch that you reach for while you're climbing this tree is ahimsa, which is non-harm. So ahimsa is non-harm in your thought forms, non-harm in your actions, non-harm in your words, non-harm in your tone, non-harm in your practices, and it's beyond just self-love. Am I harming anything right now?
Yeah.
And so that's what really distincts it, is so many people don't realize that taking this idea of, oh, I'm loving myself, could actually lead to a lot of harm to someone else. And that's
where self-love becomes narcissistic.
Right. So
Always putting yourself first.
I really prefer this idea of ahimsa because it's so much in your heart space. It's very heart chakra oriented. However, it's so much more than just self-love. It's, am I harming anything? It's the attitude of non-harm.
See, and that gets very tricky because, like, you can't even eat an apple without harming it, right? So, how in practicality does this work?
Well, it's not so much that because, some ideas say that a plant spirit is honored to be taken in by a higher consciousness.
Right.
So
yeah, well, same with animal spirits too,
right.
Which is another thing. It's more of a Native American philosophy that I've had very profound personal experiences with that I won't get into here because this is a conversation about yoga. But yeah, the same rule applies for animal spirits.
Right.
Yeah.
So you can think about like that while consuming something. However, there's a very big difference between harming an animal versus utilizing it and consuming it in an ethical way.
In a way that brings it honor.
Doesn't harm it.
In a way that brings it honor.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
That makes sense. And what about this? Again, with the no harm limb being slightly tricky for some people. Let's just say somebody's trying to harm you, and the only way to stop them from harming you is to harm them. Like self-defense, for example. How does that come into play?
That's a great question. There are those who take ahimsa to the extreme, which could be
like Jesus.
Yeah, exactly. However, practicing ahimsa, they do say that protecting yourself is a part of it. So prioritizing, peaceful resolution with someone while also protecting yourself. So it's a lot more about striking this balance between self-preservation and nonviolence.
Mm-hmm. Right. I have a personal theory on that, relevant to the path of Jesus and Christ consciousness. So when Jesus was crucified, he was obviously harmed,
Mm-hmm.
and not once ever did he do anything with all of his power to try to stop that.
Mm-hmm.
And so, because he didn't harm another, remaining clear of karma, when he did die, he was able to ascend and rise again.
Mm-hmm.
So while many humans might think, well, it's okay and just for me to harm another if they're trying to harm me, it's not really a matter of whether or not you could, but more so a matter of whether or not you should. Like, yeah, maybe it is okay and just, but also, are you sharing karma with them now?
Yeah.
And is this going to keep you in third dimensional realm,
Mm-hmm.
Until you learn to transcend the illusion of self,
Mm-hmm.
because everything is connected, everything is one.
Mm-hmm.
And so perhaps if somebody's, harming you, trying to take your life, and you actually follow like the teachings of Jesus, and take that no harm to the extreme, you end up, ascending, reaching heaven,
Mm-hmm.
and not having to come back,
Mm-hmm.
or maybe fully becoming a bodhisattva and actually rising again as an ascended master. Like, who knows? Because nobody's ever tried.
Yeah.
Nobody tries. So
Yeah.
do we really know? You know, I personally know that I've defended myself, you know, before, you know, so like I already have that karma in this lifetime of harming another who was seeking to harm me, you know.
Yeah, I guess the way that I would think about it in the way that Ahimsa views this is recognizing that self-defense is not synonymous with inflicting harm. And so there's a lot of different ways that you can de-escalate, you know, verbally de-escalate, recognize potential threats, and do your best to avoid them through discernment. Look for other ways to disengage, like an escape route. That would be the main focus of Ahimsa. And then using physical skills as a last resort, right? And at that point, it's not inflicting harm. You know, it's a self-preservation that ultimately that person, like, allowing them to harm you is going to cause them so much more harm, right? Than if you self-defend and then get out of it.
If you can, right. Which is why the monks practice self-defense, so that they can learn to disarm without harming.
Exactly.
You know,
Yeah.
and that's an amazing practice. But do you know Lazarus? Did you know the story of Lazarus in the Bible?
You have to remind me.
So the day before Jesus was crucified, he told his disciples to arm themselves with swords. But he's instructed them, under no circumstances should you use your sword or unsheath it. And when the soldiers came to get Jesus, one of his disciples unsheathed his sword. And Jesus became very upset with him, and he reminded him that he told him not to unsheath his sword. Because it's not being harmless that makes us good. It's having the ability to inflict harm but not using it. You know?
Yeah.
And that's what Jesus was trying to teach us. Like, have a sword, be strong and powerful, but don't use it to harm anybody.
Yes.
Even under circumstances of self-defense. And the problem was that he unsheathed the sword and cut the ear of one of the soldiers, you know? And it was like, he caused somebody harm, you know, now you're sharing karma with them. And so yeah, I love that.
Yeah, I love that.
If you can disarm without harming, then that's definitely the way.
Pure
That's the
Ahimsa.
point. So martial arts are really important for that. you
Yeah.
know?
Exactly.
That's why people practice, that's why spiritual people practice martial arts.
Yeah. Yeah. So we are now on the second branch.
I think that was the second,
That was
wasn't
the
it?
first limb.
Oh, okay.
So now we're on the second limb.
Gotcha.
So after the yamas, we have the niyamas. The niyamas are positive duties, essentially, acting as a guideline for self-discipline. So they complement the yamas because the yamas do focus on external behavior, ethical principles that you use to interact with the world. The niyamas are ethical principles that you use to interact with the self. And there's also, I believe, 5 niyamas. So we don't have to go into all of them, but...
Yeah, we'd talk forever if we went into all of these.
Right, but one of them, just for an example of the self-discipline, is saucha, which means cleanliness. And
Cleanliness is next to godliness.
yeah, so this involves maintaining physical, mental, and spiritual cleanliness, extending beyond physical cleanliness, encompassing it, but extending beyond that to encompass mindful living, avoiding negativity, avoiding clutter, and cultivating a peaceful space.
Clutter. Clutter is the worst.
Yeah,
Oh boy.
right.
Hoarding.
Yeah,
Hoarding's a sin.
it is. It's not self-discipline.
Right.
And so yeah, that's just one example. That is one niyama that is a positive duty that you have, that walking the path of yoga, you uphold to keep yourself in line in a positive way. And then the third, so we have those two, which is so interesting because the third limb is the asana, which is the physical practice. We already went over that. And obviously the physical practice improves your strength, your flexibility, your breath awareness, and overall well-being. I just find it so interesting that the first two limbs are very off the mat, right? The yamas and the niyamas.
Mm-hmm.
And those are like, if you're doing it by these steps, you're supposed to do those steps before you walk into a yoga class. And get on the mat.
Wow. If only.
I know. Right.
There'd be a lot less of that. Get the fuck off my yoga mat. You know?
Yeah.
Competitive yoga.
That would not exist. That
Right.
would not exist.
Totally.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So in this sense, the steps are very, very important. The limbs. Moving to the fourth limb, which is pranayama, which is breath control. So these are techniques that are helping you regulate, control your breath, focus on this ancient practice of breath awareness, which is linking you to every common present moment.
Breath awareness is God awareness. God is breath. The defibrillator puts God back into you.
Right.
Because it sparks us into an inhale.
It's true.
It is true.
Yeah.
God is breath. The breath of life that flows through all things. Yeah, so that's a really big one.
That's a big one.
Focusing on the breath. That's a big part of yoga.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's huge.
Yeah, there's actually a whole form of yoga that is just dedicated to mastering pranayama, because there's so many different breath techniques for different parts of your body, tapping into different energy systems.
Yeah.
Psychosomatic release.
And it's also interesting to think about breath in terms of, just everyday life outside of, there is really nothing outside of the practice of yoga, which is what this is unfolding. But if you're like in an argument with somebody and you just decide to take a deep inhale, it's really hard to keep arguing after taking a 30-second inhale. Like,
it's true.
Yeah.
Or you could take the other approach, which is why I love pranayama, and just start doing breath of fire. Just channel it that way, right? If you're feeling fire, you're feeling intensity.
That'll put an end to an argument pretty quick.
Just transmute it into breath of fire.
Just start breathing fire, especially if it's someone on the street you don't know. They'll be like, okay, I'm out of here. I'm done with this.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep. And then our fifth branch of yoga is pratyahara. So pratyahara is withdrawal of the senses. So this is really interesting. It's all about turning awareness away from external stimuli and cultivating inner awareness. And this can show up in a lot of ways. Some people go super extreme, where they are completely dedicated to fasting, celibacy, minimalism, in the sense that they're not buying external things for luxury. They're on the extreme level, it's
sensory deprivation. Dark rooms. One of the things I love about celibacy is a lot of people think celibacy just means not having sex. And that's just abstinence. And a lot of people who believe they're celibate, like, I'll talk to people who are like, I was celibate for 2 years. I'm like, did you ever masturbate? Well, yeah, of course I masturbated. You weren't actually celibate.
No.
You're receiving stimulation. Like, celibacy is a break from all forms of stimulation.
Right.
So that can even be eating a piece of candy.
Exactly. Yeah, and that is pratyahara, it encompasses that. It's all about, the withdrawing of any external stimuli. And so, for example, a more well-known practice of this is the Vipassana meditation, which is silence. That's at least a week dedicated to silence. Typically not eating very much. If anything, you're not even really moving that much. It's so much attention dedicated to inner awareness that Vipassana meditation is known as silence. It's people go on retreats and spend the whole time in silence.
Yeah. I once did 40
Nice.
days of silence while I lived in Los Angeles.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I had to run my business. I couldn't go on like a retreat,
Yeah.
But I did 40 days without breaking once.
Mm.
And it was one of the most life-changing experiences I've ever had by far.
Yeah.
And the first word I said when I did break my 40 days of silence was Adam.
Mm-hmm.
Because I was like, all right, today I can talk. Like, what am I going to do with it? I was like, I think I'll call my buddy Adam. So I called him up on the phone. He answered. I said, Adam. And I noticed my voice sounded different.
Yeah.
And it's never sounded the same since. It was much calmer, and it just sort of rolled out of my throat. And I learned a lot about humanity during that time, a lot about projection, like I'd be at the grocery store and somebody would like hand me a receipt and say like, thanks, have a good day, and I would just like nod my head and they'd give me like a dirty look because they'd think that I was just like, pretentious or intentionally not responding. And I was like, wow, so many people are projecting on me just because I'm not talking. I realized how much talking is unnecessary people pleasing, and yeah.
Yeah, it's true. I think the fact that your voice changed after is highlighting so much truth on the power of all of your attention, right? Like your energy flows where your attention goes, on the inner awareness. And simply doing that, maybe some people think they need to go find a speech coach if they want their voice to be more calm, better tonality, not even realizing that if they direct their energy to that inner awareness, externally things will heal themselves, Things will regulate and balance themselves out very naturally.
Not that there's any problem with voice coaches, but
No, just saying it's a very different approach to how many people solve problems through external solutions.
right, exactly.
Yeah. And that's what Pratyahara
when everything that they
about.
need is inside of them. Yeah,
Yeah.
makes sense.
Yeah. And so moving to the sixth limb, we have dharana, which is concentration. So this is sustaining your focus on one single object, like fire, a breath, a mantra, any object essentially that you focus your entirety on. And yeah.
I'm really into that. I am in a constant state of concentration. And people don't realize how intense my concentration is. I notice everything, like earlier when I was talking to you about pouring the water and like where it was poured, some people think that I am just like too intense, but everything matters, like where and how we do everything is just so important all the time. Like not even every second, but within the space between the seconds. It's just like that constant state of concentration. It's so important. I actually didn't realize that was, that does make sense. I think that the years of practicing yoga like I did, where I used to do it like multiple times a day. Sometimes I would do yoga from like 3 a.m. to like 6 or 7 a.m. I'd just do it all night until the sun came up.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This was long ago, back when I used to work at the Abbey, the world's most popular gay bar in Los Angeles. And I started going through my spiritual awakening my first main spiritual awakening while I was working there. And I would come home like amped up from the music and the work at like 2 a.m. Like, what am I gonna do with all this energy? And I would just do yoga till the sun came up. And it put that concentration into my nervous system in a way where it just locked it in, sealed it, and it's just always there now.
That's beautiful.
That did come from yoga.
It does come from yoga. If you think about in a class, often a yoga instructor will remind you to focus on an object that is not moving. If you're holding these balancing postures, tree pose, one-legged mountain, things like that, because essentially you're channeling that dharana, the concentration, so that focusing on that one object that isn't moving, or one single thing, can be embodied, and so your entire body is in this place of concentration, like you just said, it's locked in the nervous system.
And the really beautiful thing too about concentration, and the way it changes our life when you have it in that way, that it's a constant state of being, is that people complain about anxiety and depression, and people and everything, people complain about everything. And when you're concentrated, you're not complaining. When you're concentrated, you're not thinking a negative thought. If you're thinking a negative thought, it's because you're not concentrating. Negative thoughts are distractions. All these things that people see as obstacles and barriers are actually just them not concentrating on what's actually there. So that concentration is ineffably important. It's like everything. It's just like, okay, if you are cold and you're thinking about how you're cold, but you can't change that, you're not concentrating. Because what are you actually doing right now? You should be so concentrated on what you're doing, whether it's sleeping or working or standing in line or whatever, that you're not even thinking about how cold it is.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And so after the sixth limb, we have the seventh, which is dhyana, the Sanskrit word for meditation. So this takes the concentration to another level of achieving this state of deep mental concentration, focused awareness. However, taking that to another level, leading to a deeper understanding and connection with oneself, because it's a precursor to higher states of consciousness. And so that kind of leads into the next limb. They really all do.
Yeah, so that's like where the concentration crystallizes into a concentrated form of consciousness.
Yes.
Basically.
Exactly. So instead of one object, you can be doing
everything. Like
and
God consciousness.
Exactly.
Multitasking, but hyper-focused on every task that you're multitasking on at the same time.
And each task
that sounds like my ADHD,
enough
to be honest.
attention.
That sounds like my ADHD. Literally.
Each task is equally as important, right? A lot of times people multitask and they get behind one. They're not able to fully delve themselves into everything. Maybe one thing's a little more important, and there's this imbalance.
Right.
So once you achieve the state of meditation, of dhyana, you can practice a mindful meditation, which is just sitting still, focusing on your breath. However, dhyana can be taken into everything. It can be taken into movement, exercise, dancing. It can be taken into actually, working and maybe even sitting on a laptop.
It's where singular concentration becomes quantum concentration.
It becomes a deep mental concentration.
Yeah, multi-concentration.
Yeah. And then that is the precursor to samadhi, which is the eighth limb of yoga.
The apple?
Samadhi is the
fruit.
Apple. So we made it.
We made it to the fruit.
Yeah, we did. So samadhi is essentially the ultimate union. It's found in a profound state of meditation, meditative absorption, often described of the highest level of mental concentration, where at that point your mind is solely one pointed focus, and it's so blissful. So samadhi means ultimate bliss. Right.
So this is where you have the Krishna meditating at the top of the mountain. Right? The image of Krishna meditating at the top of the mountain.
Yes.
And being able to astral project with his consciousness into multiple places at the same time
Exactly.
while he's still sitting there at the top of the mountain.
Exactly.
That's the fruit.
That's
what Eve thought she was getting? Far from it. Put some clothes on, girl. No way. It's not that easy, buddy. You got to work for it.
Right. Well, and yeah, really, Eve was unfortunately, she was far from this, because samadhi is characterized as the absence of distracting thoughts, the absence of distracting emotions. There's only unity with the highest reality.
Okay.
Uh-huh.
So that's all very valuable information. Now, let's talk about how the Hindu religion relates to yoga, and where Christians are getting this idea that yoga is a worship of deities and gods that are satanic.
Okay, so essentially, yoga was created, as far as history and ancient texts go. Sanskrit is the very first language that was ever created, which is the language that yoga is often translated from, or it was the language yoga was translated from. So there's these ancient scripture texts of all this knowledge called the Vedas, and these are the first recorded scripture to ever exist on earth. And these scripture is what Hindus took and used as the foundation of their religion. So Hindus do practice yoga. However, they have prioritized yoga into more of a hierarchy rather than looking at it as this really big picture.
Mm-hmm.
So in Hinduism, bhakti yoga, going back to
the body,
the devotion, is seen as the highest form of yoga. Bhakti yoga is devoting yourself to the higher power. So this is why you see often Hindus offering food, offering jewelry, offering clothing to their gods, because in their eyes, that is the ultimate path to what we're talking about with, the state of bliss, the state of union, and they prioritize that. They
Right.
also practice jhana. They practice the other forms. However, it's not in a way, if you look at it from a yoga perspective, that is very much about balance.
Okay, so the Hindu religion worships many gods, Lakshmi, the goddess of abundance, and all these others. But where does the connection between the gods that the Hindus worship and the yoga postures come in? Why do some Christians have the idea that each different yoga posture correlates to a specific Hindu god, that by practicing that posture, you're embodying that entity, that god?
That's really a myth. I think
It's just a myth.
It's just a myth.
Right, so basically they're just looking at yoga, they're looking at Hinduism, they're pairing yoga with Hinduism because Hindus practice yoga. And they're saying, oh, these are the postures of these deities.
And Hindus also speak Sanskrit.
Right.
So they see it as one of the same. When yoga was created first, Hinduism followed as a religion. Yoga is not a religion. Like I said, yoga is a state of being.
Okay, so yoga didn't come from Hinduism, Hinduism came from yoga.
Exactly.
So there you have it.
So
it's a myth, and Christians can practice yoga.
Absolutely.
And should.
Nothing in the Bible says anything about yoga.
If I walk into a church and people are practicing yoga, I'm praising hallelujah. Let's go.
Me too.
I'm bringing my mat to church.
Me too.
That's the church I want to go to.
Yeah.
That would be great. Singing some songs, praising Jesus, and doing yoga.
Mantras. Yeah.
Let's glow.
Yeah.
That's really cool. Thank you for sharing all that information. It was very valuable, and we all appreciate it so much.
Thanks for having me. My pleasure.
Happy Easter, everybody.
Happy Easter.
Woo-hoo. So I've heard people say before that yoga, because yoga translates to yoking, that yoga is a practice of yoking the spirit to the body and becoming a whole integrated being that way. But you're saying that yoga is actually yoking yourself, your being, with the divine, correct?
Correct. So the union or the yoking in yoga is referring to yoking your individual consciousness with the universal divine consciousness.
Right, which is God.
Yeah.
So yoga is a practice of getting closer to God.
Yeah.
So it's like the practice of getting closer to God. It's like we pray, reading the Bible doesn't necessarily make us closer to God. Like going to church doesn't necessarily make us closer to God. Praying definitely does make us closer to God, because a relationship is literally a communication. It's just like some people say that a relationship is only as good as its communication, Mm-hmm. Like actually, like the communication is the relationship itself. So praying to the divine or praying to God is definitely strengthening our relationship to God. But the practice of yoga, as you just laid it all out, that whole practice is a practice that brings us closer to God. So it's actually quite Christian, ironically.
It can be in addition to any religious beliefs. There's no.
Do you feel like Jesus was a yogi? Do you feel like he practiced yoga?
I do. He practiced ahimsa, he practiced karma.
Everything you just told me about yoga reminds me of Jesus' life, literally. You know what I mean? Like it all sounds like everything you just said about the 6 spokes and 8 limbs of yoga reminds me of what Jesus was trying to teach us.
Yeah.
So I do feel like yoga brings us closer to God.
Well, that's what it's designed for. It's a present moment application of being closer to God rather than a reaching or going.
Yeah, and the thing about the Bible, and I read the Bible like front to back, actually, like read it,
Mm-hmm.
and go in depth about things that people don't talk about in churches. But oftentimes, and this isn't just in relation to Christianity, but any religion, the practices of the religion themselves are actually practices that take us further from God, are actually practices that harm people, for example, and these are not godly things to do, according to Jesus. The God of the Old Testament was a much different voice than Jesus. Like the God of the Old Testament commanded us to burn animal flesh at the altar because according to that God, the smell of burning flesh is a pleasing aroma to the Lord, and commanded us to literally wage war against other nations for worshiping other idols and murder, all the adult men, take all the children as slaves, take all of the women who have not known a man or had sex as slaves, kill all the women who have had sex. Like, these are things Moses did to multiple nations crossing the desert with the people that he freed from Egypt, And these are things that in the Old Testament were commanded by God. So religion, doesn't always bring us closer to the God that I know of through Jesus, which again is a very different voice than the Old Testament God. The God who practices non-harm, for example. Like Jesus said to practice non-harm, the God of the Old Testament commanded us to kill people who practice false idols. When I say us, I mean Moses and the people crossing the desert, Yeah. So I really do believe that of all the things that a person can practice and all the religions that a person can practice, that none of them are closer to the teachings of Jesus than yoga. So I just find it so ironic that of all the religions out there, it's really only the Christians that say that yoga is evil.
Yeah, I think I absolutely agree with that. And I think part of that is because in my eyes, I think something in Christianity potentially wants people to believe that they need something outside of themselves to have that connection. I think that's what's threatening about yoga to them. That yoga is completely eradicating that idea of the need for something external to tap into Christ consciousness, tap into the divine.
Right. So because Christians seek to follow Jesus, and the devil doesn't want us to follow Jesus, the devil seeks to pull Christians off the path with more energy and resources than any other religion. So anything that actually brings us closer to Jesus, closer to the actual divine, closer to the Creator, closer to God, the devil is going to try to convince us is evil, which is why Christians believe that yoga is evil, because the devil is not wanting guiding Christians away from the very thing that will bring them closer to God.
Correct. Right. Yeah, I agree with that. And like I said, yoga is a beautiful addition to any religion that brings people comfort, brings them security and safety, and is very harmonious with religious practices. So it will just add another layer of connection to the divine, to God, than what you already have.
Right. And I've experienced the same thing with yoga that I've experienced with Christianity, where I would walk into a church, and not everybody in a church is Christian, you know? But I would walk into a yoga studio, not everybody in the yoga studio is a yogi, you know?
It's true.
Yeah, it's true. And you just find a lot of fakes in these spaces, you know, that give them a bad name. Like, for example, like Jesus is all about non-judgment. Judge not that ye not be judged. Okay, pretty straightforward. But yet, so many Christians tend to be some of the most judgmental people on earth. You know, thinking anybody who doesn't think like them is going to go to hell for all of eternity. That's pretty much the most judgmental thing that one can think. Right there.
Yeah.
You know, which is not Christ-like. And just like the word yoga means to yoke, the word Christian means to be Christ-like. Like, period, that's it. So we don't become a Christian only simply by asking Jesus to save us, like modern day Christians believe. We become a Christian by following the path of Christ. And this is why Jesus said, your faith is proven by your works. Works without faith. Faith without works is dead. That's what Jesus said. So it's not that a lot of Christians today are more so they're more motivated by the desire to reach heaven than they are the desire to do good. And so they will say things like, you can't earn your way into heaven. You were born a sinner, you'll always be a sinner. You're not good enough for heaven. You can only reach heaven through the grace of Jesus. And I'm just like, why are you so focused on heaven, and why are you not focused on the present moment right now and serving God to the best of your ability right now? Because that's all that really matters. You know, like, you're all about this building up these treasures in heaven goal, which is spiritual materialism, and is no better or worse than building up treasures on earth. It's the same thing. And that's not what Jesus is about. Jesus is about giving treasures away. Jesus said, sell all your things and give your money to the poor. And I actually did that. You know, like, that's where Now Alchemy came from, is giving all my things away to the poor and moving out into my car, you know, and just serving God to the best of my ability at that time. Actually, I have a really funny story about that. I had all these like Armani jackets and $600 suede shoes and things like that I brought to the Goodwill and gave away. And a few months later, while I was living in my car in Venice, I walked out of this vegan juice shop at like 8 o'clock at night, and there were these 3 homeless men leaning against my car. And one of them was wearing a pair of my very expensive suede shoes that I'd given away. And I saw them all leaning against my car. It was this little car that I slept in. It was a Honda Fit. And I walked up to him and I said, "Hey, where'd you get those shoes?" And he goes, "Oh, do you like these shoes? I got these at the Goodwill. They retail for $500. I got them for $5. I was like, "Yeah, I know. Those were my shoes. I brought them to Goodwill." He's like, "Oh, these are yours? Here, I'm so sorry. I'll give them back." I was like, No, it's cool." And then the guy next to him said, "I'll give him my sandals so he can give you your shoes." And then the guy next to him said, "I'll give him my boots so he can give him his sandals so he can give you your shoes."
Oh.
And I was like, "Okay, you 3 dudes right here, you are the 3 wise men."
Oh.
And I just rolled him up some tobacco and we talked, and then I drove off. But that to me was like confirmation that I was on the right path.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's the path of Christ. Like that's what being a Christian is about,
Absolutely.
And yeah, it does require the prayer. It does require asking Jesus for forgiveness. And like I have, been redeemed multiple times actually. It's just redeemed last weekend. But like, it's a daily occurrence to me. But the works prove the faith. If the works aren't there, the faith isn't real, And that's the same with yoga.
Yeah, it is the same with yoga. And essentially just keeping in mind, for example, I always remind my students to let go of anything that was happening before they arrived and let go of anything that will happen after. And I think that's beyond a class, the mentality that can actually allow people to come back to redeeming themselves. Because if you can let go of anything that happened before, let go of anything
Right.
that will happen.
Yeah, because that's what redemption is. Like
That's redemption.
that is letting go of the past is synonymous with redemption. Like when I say I've been redeemed by Jesus, what I mean is that I can trace back to my memory of all the times that I didn't do something the way I knew I should have. Those are the things I ask Jesus to forgive me for. And I can feel that Jesus wipes the slate clean, forgives me, removes my past from my DNA, my karma. Like Jesus is literally the Redeemer,
Yeah.
And we can also redeem ourselves in a similar way, not the same way exactly. Jesus is the Redeemer, but we can also let things go. Like we can forgive ourselves too. And that's an important, like Jesus can't forgive us if we don't forgive ourselves. It's like when Jesus would heal people, they would be blind or have leprosy or whatever it was, and they would ask Jesus to heal him, and Jesus would say, "Do you believe?" And they would say yes, and he would say then okay. Because if they didn't believe, then he had no power with them. So there's everything is one. So there's no separation. So how can something outside of us have power over us when it's only a reflection of us? And like Jesus is not an exception to that.